Okay, so we are ready to start. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to see you all joining now for our PostSensorium plenary session. So we just have an opening today of the RIXC festival, the topic of which is PostSensorium. It was very recently, just 25 years ago exactly, so when we did our first conference. And then we were so excited about all these virtual possibilities and virtual of the new technologies. And however, very quickly, we also realized that there should be, sorry, so Jens is calling me, so the first panel speaker, so I think I will take this call, sorry. Okay, it was a short interruption by Jens HAUSER, who is trying to connect, and I sent him the Zoom link again, because he's also a moderator of our first panel. Welcome everyone. I think some more people has joined. And also this conference is a part of our larger project called Green Revisited, which started about 3 years ago as a cooperation between Jens HAUSER and also RIXC, and then it grew into a bit larger network. So we have also other contributors to this topic exploring, and so it slowly, gradually developed also into Ecodata last year edition of our festival and PostSensorium this year. So I will be shortly talking and giving some insight of how it was evolving over these years from my side. But yeah, PostSensorium. So this is, we will be trying to explore here this immensity of our virtual and real life challenges, which demand a renewed focus on sensory perception and embodied experiences. So we really aim with this festival and the conference to create a platform for these artistic interventions and critical discussions on the 21st century virtual sensing technologies, science and aesthetics, and also reconsidering the relations between the actual and virtual, organic and artificial, natural and techno-social, human and modern human. So our festival program, the only physical event is the exhibition, and the exhibition will be open tonight in 4 hours, so depending on your time zone. And you also feel free just to join us virtually, because we will be streaming it in Zoom as well. And and in 2 hours we have a keynote by Christian Paul on automating senses. And now we are starting all this conference day one with the plenary session devoted to this Green Revisited conference. So I would like also to introduce today our moderator of this panel. So Jens HAUSER is here, hello. And also talking will be in this panel Adam Brown, hello. And Kristin Berghost, and Maria Castellanos. So, Jens, if you're ready.
Yeah, hello, thanks Rasa for this kind introduction. I have to apologize to arrive a little bit last minute. I'm in the middle of Switzerland right now and just rushing from the train station to this venue. So I had some difficulties to connect. So, why greener studies? And some years ago, after I have myself been collecting everything that has to do with greenness for the last 30 years, Rasa and Reitis suggested that would be a good idea to take this greener studies, as I see it, a little bit further, and to investigate in how far this pervasive greenness trope that is ruling our society, while we are washing greenhouse effects away, we are greening symbolically everything, how to get some physical, some material culture back to the media arts, and in how far what we as human animals see as green might not be green for other sentient beings. And so there is this trope that is being deconstructed through this 3 years project, for which we have been lucky to be awarded a Europe Creative Grant. And I want to welcome to this panel 3 persons that are intervening today. So this is, as Rasa already mentioned, artist and professor of art Adam Brown, with a contribution on a very greenness related topic that was present in all our exhibitions up to date, which is Shadows from the World of Death. And it's about the toxicity and the ambiguity of green more than a symbol. Then we have, of course, Christine Berghost, one of the team members of this green consortium from Oslo, and presenting about FELB, so the next and forthcoming conference in November, Living Technologies and Renewable Futures. And last but not least, also a contribution from Oslo, as Rasa mentioned, Maria Castellanos Vicente, about plant sense and how to create a multi-species garden. So maybe this is a good opportunity to recall that first, let's remember that when we say that as human beings, we see the plant green, we say that the plant is green, but let's remember that this plant is only green to us. It appears to us green because its chlorophyll absorbs the high energy red and blue light photons for photosynthesis, but rejects this middle spectrum, so to say, as its waste. And this spectrum, which we see as green with the wavelengths from roughly between 490 to 565 nanometers, is useless for the plant's photosynthesis. So, but it corresponds to our anthropocentric definition and our sensorium as human beings, and as a result of biological evolution. So we humans are tempted to actually mistake vegetal chaff for the vegetal green itself, which is a kind of amazing ontological misunderstanding. And from this ontological misunderstanding, we have started also to see in how far other plants, other animals, other living beings would sense. So also questioning what it means to sense, not what is green, but how, when, for whom, and why is green. And of course, this can be extrapolated. So the whole strategy of our program, I think, deals with actually inverting and opening up the topic of green in contemporary strategy. In order to give some examples, I would like to share some slides with you from the 2 exhibitions. The exhibition that first was co-produced with Rasa and Reitis in Riga in 2019, and the other one also in 2019 in Bourges, which was actually the starting point from which on this green European project moved on. So let me just share some screen. So all the artists participating, and despite their different media art in both the ungreen and the ouverte exhibitions, employed greenness with a techno-scientific awareness, with criticality, a deep media analytical approach, in order to bridge the knowledge gap that is increasingly obstructing what we are searching, namely an interdisciplinary dialogue between the arts, the humanities, and the natural sciences, and claiming that the real engagement also with plants needs situated knowledges beyond symbolism. And as much as the concept of green is inverted, I want to suggest that such inversion has in both cases also been used in connecting and staging these various art projects in the 2 exhibitions. So in the literary style, let's say inversion is also called an anastrophe, from the Greek to turn back, meaning the reversal of the normal order of words in a sentence. It's also used in poetry to produce emphasis, or in rhetorics to actually the turning of an argument against the person who put it forward. Also, it can be considered as alienation or defamiliarization or a distancing effect in the tradition of Shklovsky and Brecht. So we try to do this with both of our exhibitions. So let's have a look at how such inversions also transpire in how we as curators try to stage these strategies in ungreen and ouverte. So for example, entering the exhibition space in the Riga exhibition, audiences first encountered the purest green light possible in Jan-Peter Sonntag's installation RIXC from gamma Ver cycle, and generated by a monochrome and monofrequency plasma light, in which gases need to be heated up during 10 minutes. And it's inspired by Jules Verne's The Green Ray, describing a strange color phenomenon at sunset over the sea before it disappears. And likewise, when looking into this light spectrum, the human eye adapts and starts to perceive it as white. So actually perception becomes the sculpture. And the exit of the show was then totally dark space, in which green sound, if you want, was presented without any kind of visual disturbance. So it's testimonies from rich and exuberant Amazonian biodiversity in Francisco Lopez hyper rainforest, an immersive sound installation created from original environmental recordings carried out during 20 years in rainforests all over the world. So behind the visual impression of sublime greenery, rainforests, of course, are natural acousmatic environments. That means that the sources of all those sounds remain invisible. Then how are green actually every day or over the whole year? Once you start measuring them, this is what Agnes Meyer-Brandis asked in this video installation, Forest Green, showing the average monochrome color value of a landscape over a year measured with webcams from which RGB data, middle range data have been extracted to give this left-sided monochrome screens. Then, but even in the staging of this automated installation, Kentucky Perfect by Canadian artist Robert Hangewell, here we have shown a grown nadir lawn as an anthropogenic vegetation cover, a kind of symbolic surface only, which does not accept any failure and requires continuous effort. So we have been defamiliarizing the color inversion effects here, and these are crucial because the grass is continuously lit, watered and mowed, but interestingly, the reddish-white growth lights make the actual turf appear as rather gray. But only after a few minutes of observation, our eyes perceive it as green, and then when you turn around, what seemed to be a white cube gallery before is shimmering greenish. So here is public intervention called toy emissions, also installed in the Riga exhibition, functioned through the contradiction between the materiality of pollution and the symbolic color codes. And here a miniature Porsche car is driving through the streets of Manhattan, releasing smoke in yellow, pink, and green, blue, and purple. But the toy Porsche has everything the bigger ones have, as well as more beautiful clouds of colored emission. And another kind of inversion takes place in Eva Maria Lopez's garden and photography projects that he staged both in Riga and in Bourges. I Never Promised You a Green Garden included ornaments with decorative motifs similar to those folk art and mandala motifs, but consisting of logos from companies that produce glyphosate or GMO plants. So in the first step, Lopez burns the ornamental patterns in the very literal sense of a brand that appears as negative. And in the follow-up project, We Resist, she inversed that image while seeding an ornamental garden in the courtyard of the art center in Bourges, using 16 plants that have developed resistance to herbicide sold by multinational chemical companies. So the design of the ornaments respects selected features of these companies' logos and is reminiscent of the most typical jardins à la française. And We Resist also refers to these Baroque gardens, once designed by French landscape architect André Lenôtre. So the design of these jardins à la française is referring back to Baroque gardens that are designed by French landscape architect André Lenôtre. And these are dominated by optical symmetry of these only wooden masses and enormous walls of greenery that is highlighting perspectives, but less is guided by aspects of any kind of biodiversity. Also, Spela Petrich's 20 hours long performance, Scopopoesis, and Spela Petrich is also one of the artists in this year's exhibition, can be conceived of as a biophotographic inversion in which the artist and germinating crest stands vis-a-vis each other, illuminated by a strong artificial light. So the title means shaped by darkness and refers to the continuous shadow of the artist's body that signals the plants to respond by changing their shape and color so that their bodies in turn produce a living imprint of her silhouette. So by obstructing light, the artist's shadow causes a phenomenon called etiolation, resulting both in the paling and the lengthening of the cress's stem, which is then contrasted by her own shrinking height due to her persistent stillness. And here we have a transition already to the next speaker, Adam Brown, because different levels of inversion are also guiding Adam Brown's performative installation, Shadows from the Walls of Death, where he recreates live the highly toxic pigment Paris green, which was often used in deadly wallpaper to establish at home, ironically, humans' material connection to the color green, while the Industrial Revolution was eroding it. But beside, he produced the toxic wallpaper and then a Van Gogh referenced image, the famous drain window in his bedroom. So placed next to each other in the Bourges Gallery, Karine Bonneval showed terrariums from the Victorian period, as well from this what is called as fern fever, where every bourgeois interior had to have a kind of furniture to bring greenness, exotic greenness into the living room. And these were called Vardian cases, and they were invented to protect plants imported from overseas to Europe from air pollution in the 19th century. But here the plants are made of palm oil wax. And in parallel with the controversy surrounding palm oil held responsible for ecological issues linked to monocultures and deforestation, the artist Karine Bonneval here refers back to the history of the botanical science as being colonialist. So the Wardian case is also evoked in Tavi Suisola's installation Waiting for the Light in the Ungreen exhibition in Riga. And here the Wardian cases function as miniature closed ecosystems in which plants are grown under the artificial light provided here by fiber optic cables used in intercontinental communication and carried by threads of light. So here the sun is essential for the plants is being delivered by a technological device. So each plant here relates to these communicative acts, the stream of light, giving them an agenda they intended indeed very much uninvolved. Also, I think the PostSensorium conference, and this is the last example I'm going to quote here, is about trans-species approaches to perception and how the sensorium has not been to be regarded only from a human-centered perspective. Here in the exhibition project that Daniela Mitterberger and Tiziano Derme realized in Bourges, was putting the viewer into a situation of interspecies communication with bats. The title is The Eye of the Other, and the installation explores bats' sensorial systems. So while human beings distinguish fruit from foliage, for example, visually, via their ability to discriminate red and green, acquired through biological evolution, bats do not rely on the primacy of the visual sense. They rather find flowers by recognizing the geometry of a flower by generating so-called echo fingerprints. So the eye of the others translates these fingerprints into audible frequencies and visual sensual patterns that are then comprehensible again to human senses, while acknowledging that bats are indeed also crucial indicators of biodiversity and at the same time pollinators on which several plants partially or wholly depend. So with these short examples, I think we can understand that the aim of the Greenness Project as such is to highlight that the techno-sciences of today have become themselves, of course, powerful producers of images. But what we need are material, media-specific analysis of how green mediation conceals its technical character and appears transparent, while in fact camouflaging precisely those layers that produce what they pretend only to mediate. So I have a kind of entanglement between symbolic green, ontological greenness, also the performative greening that pose challenges across disciplines that provide an epistemological panorama for playful debunking. And this is what the Green Revisited Encountering Emerging Nature Cultures project aims to achieve. And I think one of the best examples that we can actually start with is Adam Brown's own presentation, Shadows from the Walls of Death. So Adam Brown is an intermediate artist, scholar, and researcher. And his work incorporates art and science hybrids, living systems, robotics, also molecular chemistries. But also Brown is a full professor at Michigan State University, where he created a new area of study called electronic art and intermedia. So please, let's all welcome Adam Brown. Adam, are you there? So the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction and around the deep topic of green. And let me switch over here to the slideshow. Okay, so Shadows from the Walls of Death. This is the performance evening in 2019 in Latvia, the debut of Shadows from the Walls of Death in a exhibition setting, and of course curated by Rasa, and Jens. And I'm hoping to show you during this presentation some of the progress that's been made in Shadows 2 towards the end of the lecture. Okay. Niche construction theory provides a framework for understanding how human culture and the arts in particular create new material environments into which other non-human organisms can evolve, permitting these non-human organisms to become collaborators in the arts. Separating, containing, and pacifying nature has been an ancient pursuit of man. For millennia, Homo sapiens have slowly been trying to extract themselves from the natural order. Myths and parables from Judeo-Christian traditions, and more specifically Christianity in the Western world, spiritually emboldened Homo sapiens to conceptualize nature as a teleological entity designed for us to control and consume. In the West, the moral superiority of man over nature, resulting from the so-called natural philosophy, led to the rise of sciences and technologies that set the stage for the Industrial Revolution, accompanied by the rise of the modern city. Niche construction theory, as defined by John Olding Smee, is a branch of evolutionary theory that describes the dynamic relationship between all organisms and their environment. Niche construction concerns the ways in which organisms artificially modify their environment, resulting in changes in the behaviors and evolution of other species. The effects of niche construction have been documented across a wide range of species, including animals, manufacturing nests, burrows, and webs, and plants modifying nutrient cycles. Humans, however, possess an unusually potent capability to artificially regulate, construct, and destroy their environments, and the Industrial Revolution accelerated our ability to construct these environments. Human nature evolved biologically and culturally to be attracted to green, was driven to recreate greenness within urban settings. We constructed remediated environments that approximated nature and greenness into our homes, and painters made pastoral paintings and wallpapers. Couturiers designed green gowns, and sweet shops sold green candies. The artifice led, however, to a series of paradoxes and contradictions. The very chemical processes artificially employed to bring greenness back into people's lives paralleled the anthropogenic destruction of the environment and brought new poisons into the very spaces meant to be greened. These bright, new, natural greens, such as Shields and Paris green, were synthesized from toxic arsenic copper compounds that poison not only the industrial workers who fabricated them, the environments around their factories, but also the painters who used the paints, the people who put the wallpapers on their walls, and the women who wore green gowns, and the people who ate green candies. Yet nature is clever. The new toxic environments and materials that poisoned human beings, longing for greenness, became new niches for organisms that could exploit these toxins as sources of energy. While we poisoned ourselves, fungi and bacteria evolved to live in these toxic environments, reclaiming them from nature. Thus, even as the Industrial Revolution revolutionized art and poisoned the environment through the attempt to remediate nature, so nature in turn began the process of remediating, in this other meeting, these new toxic niches, because they represented new opportunities for evolution. Thus, microbes became handmaidens in the artistic process, mediating and remediating art itself. More specifically, the performance and installation, Shadows from the Walls of Death, deconstructs the symbolic and superficial use of green as a masquerade, supposedly synonymous with ecological and vegetal health, by recreating a highly toxic pigment called Paris green, then remediating it with the assistance of extremophile bacteria, synthesized artificially from a deadly combination of arsenic and copper compounds. The new Paris green was intended to reestablish humans' material connection to the color green that industrialized cities severed. By synthesizing this hypertoxic green pigment, far from the idealized pastoral nature, the performance draws this inspiration from the chemist, Dr. Robert Kedzie, who in 1874 wrote a book of the same title in an effort to raise public awareness about the dangers of arsenic pigmented wallpaper. Could art be a contributing factor to the global ecological crisis that we now find ourselves? In its recognition that humans must now be understood as climatological or geological forces on the planet, the concept of the Anthropocene demands this form of biomediated, indeed bioremediated art that can operate on multiple scales independent of human will, belief, or desires. Shadows from the Walls of Death illustrates these immediate and mediated connections. The basic story is simple. We need nature, but industrialism separated us from biomediated existence, so we created artificial forms of nature. The artifice backfired by poisoning us, but nature already had a microbial remediation. The growth of modern industry and factories beginning in Europe during the Industrial Revolution resulted in massive urbanization, giving rise to the modern city. New opportunities attracted multitudes of migrants. As cities rapidly expanded to accommodate the new migrant workforce, buildings were constructed. Brick and mortar, concrete, and factories replaced grasses, leafy plants, fruit-bearing trees, and vegetation, and soil or green space that isolate us from natural ecology that we evolved. Natural resources were stripped and the landscape along with it. For example, England had removed 95% of its original woodlands by 1700. The economy shifted from agriculture to industry, forcing the average person off the land and into cities. The growth in population in the 19th century, cities moved at such a rapid pace, there was not enough capital to keep up with the housing. Low-income newcomers moved into overcrowded slums. Our affinity for greenness, or chlorophilia, probably began 30 to 45 million years ago, when humans evolved full color vision, including the ability to perceive the color green. Countless studies have indicated that humans need access to green space to reduce stress and be healthy. We appear to crave green, or at the very least have associated the color green with nature, health, and wellness. Building on the new concrete and steel urban environment beginning during the Industrial Revolution resulted in landscapes of brown and gray, evolutionary equivalents of winter and death. Color associations, however, are not fixed symbols, but are tied to cultural and linguistic associations as well to the material world. Symbolic associations of chance, money, and love were likely due to the historical, unstable chemical properties of green paint and dyes. Throughout Western history, green has had dichotomous meanings, a symbol of life, luck, fertility, and hope on the one hand, and a symbol of poison, disorder, and the devil on the other. Current symbolic associations with green, one being connected to nature, health, sustainability, and ecology, grew out of the Industrial Revolution. Amateur gardening and corresponding magazines developed a mass appeal. This was no more apparent than during the Victorian fern craze or pterodaimonia. The fern craze was made possible due to an invention developed by an amateur botanist and naturalist, Dr. Nathaniel Bradshaw Ward, who we heard from Jens in his introduction. For years, Ward had unsuccessfully been trying to cultivate ferns in his London home. Like most city backyards, his home was surrounded by factories producing soot and toxic fumes that killed his plants. In 1829, in a moment of despair, he made an accidental discovery when a fern spore sprouted in a wet, enclosed container in which he was growing moss. Ward realized that the noxious gases from the manufactories and factories were destructive to the health of the plants in the city. The ferns enclosed in glass cases were able to thrive due to the fact that they were isolated away from the toxic anthropogenic environment induced by industry. Ward went on to cultivate more than 100 species of ferns in closed containers and eventually experimented with glazed glass cases that became known as Wardian cases. These cases remediated, contained, and tamed nature back into the Victorian home, as well as support colonial interests by aiding transportation of plants across the world. Further evidence of the desire for green was the development of green spaces botanical gardens, and parks beginning in the early 1800s. The Industrial Revolution also marked the beginning of modern chemistry, and with modern chemistry became bright, prismatic synthetic pigments such as Paris green. Until the 19th century, painters, fabric dyers, and other artists were generally limited to the range of colors they could use to naturally occurring pigments found in minerals, plants, insects, squid, and octopus ink, and so forth. Now, for the first time, chemists were learning how to make pigments that nature could never naturally produce. New green pigments were particularly valuable because the range of color available prior to the 19th century was limited to those that were either expensive, such as malachite, earth greens, which covered badly, or unstable plant greens, such as leek juice and iris, or were corrosive and reacted with neighboring colors, such as verdigris and copper resonate. Entrepreneurs suddenly found there was a strong desire among the public not only to bring live living plants to the home and build public green space, but also to make green a fashionable color. Shields and later Paris green was used as a colorant for candy, dyed clothing, and other fashionable accoutrements. Gas lighting replaced candles, increasing lighting in the homes and made it possible to use darker materials on the walls of homes. The rich colors of the newly synthesized green pigments were printed on wallpapers and applied to walls as illustrated by Van Gogh's series titled La Berceuse, or The Lullaby. One of the most popular green pigments was invented in 1775 by the Swedish chemist Carl Scheele. Like many of the new synthetic pigments, Scheele's green, as it was known, was composed of heavy metals that turned out to be highly toxic due to the fact that the primary ingredient in the pigment was arsenic. While arsenic has been proven to have some useful properties, such as medicine to treat syphilis, a beauty agent that whitens the complexion of European women, and a highly effective insecticide, its poisonous qualities should not be underestimated. In 1874, Dr. Robert Kedzie, a professor of chemistry at Michigan State University, where I also work, wrote a book titled Shadows from the Walls of Death in an effort to raise public awareness about the dangers of arsenic pigmented wallpaper. 100 copies were sent to public libraries across the state of Michigan. Each book consisted of a title, a preface, 86 wallpaper samples taken from common merchants, and a note from the Board of Health warning librarians not to let children handle the book. In the practice of the book, Kedzie outlined the effects of slow chronic arsenical poisoning. Only 3 remain. 1 copy is at Michigan State with me, 1 at the University of Michigan, and the 3rd is at the National Library of Medicine. Dr. Kedzie described the effects and dangers of the arsenic pigmented papers. Over time, the wallpapers exposed to varying environmental conditions, such as heat, cold, moisture, and dryness, broke down the papers, dislodging microscopic particles of arsenic dust into the air. The enormous distribution of these fashionably green wallpapers across Europe and an estimated 65% of wallpaper in the United States, it's not surprising that many fatal accidents occurred in children's bedrooms. Arsenic poisoning in green factories that annually produce as much as 200 tons of cupric arsenic was also well documented. Workers suffered considerable symptoms of arsenic poisoning: conjunctivitis, anemia, lesions, scars, ulcers on the hands, legs, face, and genitalia. The technological innovation of new bright, prismatic, and less expensive synthetic pigments, coupled with new scientific understanding of color and light, gave rise to new rebellious and conceptual artists at the end of the 19th century. Painters moved away from the traditional subject matter of Greek myths and royalty and idealized forms and began painting everyday people, urban landscapes, and the countryside. The invention of tin tubes in 1841 by American painter John Rand allowed for long-term storage of prepackaged paints with increased portability. Now the painter could work in the midst of his subject, which was often nature itself. Impressionists were trying to capture firsthand the reality of light and color from the real world. A growing middle class could afford to buy these impressions of nature to bring greenness into their drab urban homes, described earlier. There are many ironies inherent in the means by which painters strove to bring nature, and in particular greenness, into urban settings. By painting in plein air for the first time, artists simultaneously lost touch with the materiality of producing their own paints. Painting manufacturing by means of chemical synthesis permitted mass produce and distribution of pigments that separated the painter from his or her direct sensual experience of grinding solid pigments and natural materials into soluble paints. Thus, the increased convenience and commercialization of these new artist supplies separated the painter from the material world from which painting itself had evolved. Additionally, painters, including impressionists, used these mass-produced toxic pigments to portray the very nature that the Industrial Revolution was eroding. Thus, the human drive to recreate greenness within cities led to a series of paradoxes and contradictions. The very chemical processes artificially employed to bring greenness back into people's lives helped to contribute to the anthropogenic destruction of the environment. The further we removed ourselves from nature, the more we tried to connect with it, and the more our means of connecting led to its destruction. My research is focused on bringing to the fore these paradoxes and contradictions by recreating the processes necessary to create toxic green paints, to use them to paint impressionist-like paintings, and then to detoxify them using nature itself. We recreate in a chemically safe and controlled environment shields and Paris greens from scratch, reestablishing the painter's material connection to his paints. These paintings will be used to produce impressionist plein air paintings. To remediate the toxic nature of the paints used in these paintings, bacteria capable of metabolizing arsenic into safer forms will be sprayed on the paintings and sealed in self-contained bioreactors, which we're still working on now. Remediation, however, will oxidize the green paints to black, altering the paintings. The resulting biomass will be burned, returning the elements back to nature. And here's an example from Bourges. Bioremediation is a relatively new interdisciplinary field of research which aims to restore contaminated sites to environmentally sustainable conditions using living organisms that include bacteria, fungi, and plants, or combinations of species to accelerate metabolic processes that naturally break down or alter toxic materials such as heavy metals. Quite literally, these unique adapted organisms break down organic contaminants in the course of using the chemicals for their own growth and reproduction. Bioremediation was first studied in the late 1940s, but was not put into practice until 1972, when Richard Raymond of Sun Oil Company, using isolated microbes that he'd grown in his home laboratory, were used in situ to effectively clean up accidental crude spill in Amber, Pennsylvania. Scientists and engineers are not alone in their interest in harnessing nature to heal itself. Artists too have an interest in addressing the environmental impact brought on by human exceptionalism and the Industrial Revolution. Historically, early romantic artists, writers, activists such as Thomas Cole, Henry David Thoreau, William Wordsworth, Frederick Engels, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and the Luddites advocate for man to live simply and to move back to nature. In recent years, artists have shifted from engaging these problems purely from poetic and aesthetic representations to indexically charged generated systems of multi-species alliances and symbioses that respond directly to the anthropogenic effects of the environment. In 1991, artist Mel Chin collaborated with scientist Dr. Rufus Cheney to develop a project titled Revival Field, where a 60 by 60 foot experimental test site was constructed on Pig's Eye landfill in St. Paul, Minnesota. A circle was divided up into plots containing a selection of hyperaccumulator plants that were capable of metabolizing, thus soaking up toxic metals. The finished artwork would be a remediated site restored to its natural state. Another ambitious work centering on bioremediation, titled Plantas Autophotosynthicus in 2015 by Roberto Esparza, developed a symbiotic system to reimagine waste management in light of sewage-contaminated rivers in Latin America. In this work, Aspar's developed a hydraulic network of modular microbial fuel cells consisting of producer and consumer species from different trophic levels to achieve homeostasis. The net result of the artwork is a self-regulating system that seeks to preserve life while bioremediating urban wastewater, photosynthesizing, and generating electricity and light. As bioremediation science and technology progress, researchers have also turned their attention to extremophilic microorganisms, or organisms discovered on Earth that have evolved within environments that were once thought to be unattainable to life or uninhabitable to life. These extremophiles have adapted to thrive in environments of intense heat, acidity, salt, and high concentrations of heavy metals, and have been discovered everywhere from hydrogen sulfide-powered hot springs to deep-sea thermal vents to industrial design toxic heavy metal plating containers. A bioremediation process with extremophilic bacteria that I made in collaboration with Dr. Kazim Kashifi, titled The Great Work of the Metal Lover in 2012, is an artwork that sits at the intersection of bioremediation and alchemy, re-examining the problem of transmutation through the use of modern microbiological practice, and thus solves the unobtainable ancient human riddle of transmutation of gold. Gold production is accomplished by the pairing of a highly specialized metallotolerant extremophilic bacterium, Cupriobitis metalloidurans, and an engineered atmosphere contained within a customized alchemical bioreactor. The extreme minimal ecosystem within the bioreactor forces the bacteria to metabolize high concentrations of gold chloride, which is toxic, turning soluble gold into usable 24-karat gold. Through a reduced, artificial, anthropogenic environment, the liquid medium is purified by collaboration with a colony of non-sentient living bacteria. In the performance series, Shadows from the Walls of Death, Paris green is produced live in a chemically safe and controlled environment, recreating the industrialized process that first provided artists with their new artificial greens, while simultaneously dividing them from nature. The pigment is then transformed into paint, putting the artist into direct contact with the medium and enabling reproduction of the deadly wallpaper that Kezi warned about. Finally, a Van Gogh reference image is painted in Paris green on bacterial cultural medium, only to be further bioremediated and detoxified by bacteria-based microecologies. Such microecologies capable of remediating arsenic exist due to the evolutionary ecological principle summarized by Bass Becking. Everything is everywhere the environment selects. Here, these non-human microecologies not only help us out of this toxic environmental predicament through bioremediation, but also create opportunities for the remediation of art history, in the sense that Bolter and Grusin define these terms in their book, Remediation, Understanding New Media. As an indexical act, this artistic action opens up fields of questioning beyond the symbolic and emphasizes the importance of a material, epistemological, and political commitment of the arts. The chemical synthesis of toxic pigments, including Paris green, create a new artistic ecological niche that poisons its makers, but opens up new evolutionary opportunities for extremophilic bacteria. The artists can take advantage of this evolutionary process purposely to create new niche construction for these bacteria, therefore synergistically integrating the evolutionary process that gave rise to both art and bacteria everywhere, and co-opting non-human creativity into the remediation of art itself. Now I'm going to end here just with showing you some of the outtakes of performances that have been done since Latvia. And here I'm painting the window of the bedroom scene from Van Gogh. And then adding a bacteria agent to remediate the paint, which I showed you earlier. And finally, la Biosuse to remediate a painting. And this was just done a couple of weeks ago in Munich at Muffatella. We found this original Van Gogh that we could remediate. Or in this case, phytoaccumulate. Once again, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, for this incredibly rich presentation, deconstructing, debunking greenness, the ambiguity, the paradoxes of greening, finishing with this barrel of a toxic green painting, leading us through art history, the history of pigments, chemistry, but also phytoremediation, a very new field that is also one of your new research projects, as I understand. I would think that it's best to keep questions maybe bundled at the end, not to in order not to accumulate delay. And without further transition, would like to hand over to a person who is very much sympathetic and sensible to all what you have been presenting, Christine Berghost, who is hosting the next conference in November, from 4th to 6th of November in Oslo. And Christine is, of course, also an artist, a researcher, and educator, and currently a professor at the Faculty of Technology, Art and Design at Oslo Met University. And Christine is certainly also one of the pioneers of early art, early media art in Norway, and her interests mainly concern communicative and sensory aspects in media, art, and research. So as she's currently leading the FELT, the Futures of Living Technologies Artistic Research Project, she's hosting the conference that we hold in Oslo, also virtually, with a live art program as well, from 4th to 6th of November. And I can already announce that we are lucky to have one of the main players in post-green eco-theory as one of the keynote speakers, whom we have tried to contact and to actually invite for many of our previous conferences before without any success. But this time, Jeffrey Jerome Cohen, who is also the Dean of Humanities at Arizona State University, will be our keynote speaker for this conference. And some of you may recall him as the editor of a kind of very mind-blowing and important and inspirational book, Prismatic Ecology, Eco-Theory Beyond Green, which Jeffrey Jerem edited some years ago. So without further transition, I would like to invite Christian Berghost in order to talk about what's up in the next conference. We have 4 sections that Christine is talking about, presenting the FELT Living Technologies and Renewable Futures Conference in Oslo. Please, Christine.
Thank you, Jens. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for 2 absolutely mind-blowing presentations, lectures. I have not prepared anything as mind-blowing. Mine is just to tell you, to introduce further the conference, and I'm not even going to go far into the tracks of the conference. This you can read for yourself in our website, but I would like to present the team behind it. As I saw and heard these lectures, I also started to reflect on the complexity we need to try to understand the times we are living in and to understand our PostSensorium conditions. And it strikes me that the interdisciplinarity is so important now, and that's part of what we are working on. And that's what FELT is about. So my presentation will be about FELT, and I will try to leave space for the people I'm working with mainly. So Maria Castellanos Vicente, she is also part of this panel, and she is also part of FELT. Another person who has been here but had to leave, Hege Tapio, is also part of FELT, but I hope she will come back and be able to present herself or her research shortly before I finish. I will share the screen with you. Here we are. FELT is an acronym for Futures of Living Technologies, which is not, we did a snaky turn there to make FELT our acronym. The website where you can read about the conference, you can see beneath here, feltproject.no. The deadline for submitting proposals are already passed, but the conference will be fully online and open for anyone who wants to register to take part in it. So I hope you will remember to do that. We will have a registration portal on this website shortly. Maybe in a week's time, I think. So, FELT started as an initiative to investigate existing and future situations where computers and robots incorporate functions of living and biological system. So, one question is what life is and what life is when we combine science and artistic research. In fact, the first initiative to our collaboration came from an AI researcher in our university who saw that there is so much to reflect on and speculate on in the future that you actually need to do more than conventional research to kind of grasp it. Here is the team. I will present them. Maria Castellanos speaks on this panel. This is me listening to the fjord. All of these balls over here represent other people who are not presented in this presentation, but they are students and young people that we work with that I find is extremely important to our work. So student projects we have done for quite some time now. But just now, the last 6 months, we have a team of researchers, a postdoc, and a PhD fellow, which is Hege Tapio, as you see here. What I will do now is play you a short introduction that we made for our opening symposium. I hope it will work. So you will see how our different researchers present themselves. I go by this a little bit here. We start with the presentation from the AI researcher. This is his motivation for working with artistic research. Stefano Nekele is his name. And
all right. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. So I'm a researcher in artificial intelligence, and I try to summarize in one slide my perspective, my technical perspective of the project. So here you have a timeline. So time goes on the horizontal axis, and then on the y-axis, we have the complexity of the technology that we try to build through science and engineering. And this is mostly a slow process made of tiny incremental steps, making new technology. And then I have this dashed line, red line on top. That is basically the aim that we have as AI researchers, to make some kind of technology that is as complex or even better than human intelligence or biological life. And we are trying to get there. And not very often we have large progress. I mean, a Nobel Prize worthy type of advancement in science and technology. So we have big delta, but most likely it's very tiny incremental research. So with PhET, I feel that we want to position ourselves on the top right corner. So we want to, through art, we want to position ourselves in the future. So we want to speculate of possible futures, and some are good, some are bad, where there is super intelligence, artificial life forms, and societies of machines and humans and biological organisms, and technologies, and we have problems like the environment. And there we can imagine the different scenarios of the future. And then we can work basically by raising the ethical questions that are important and criticize what should be criticized. We can drive the research forward or backward in that sense, to meet somewhere halfway with the kind of traditional way of doing research. So instead of just doing research just from a technical perspective, and then raising the questions when we have built the technology, we want to raise the ethical questions and the criticism before this technology is built, so that we can drive the actual research toward the future that we want. So this is kind of my motivation and my technical perspective on the project.
Hello, my name is Boel Christensen Schiel. I'm one of the co-professors. I have a background from art theory and aesthetics. So I've mainly worked as a theoretician, but I have also taught in performance studies and in art education. And the later years, I have worked with education in museums in particular. And one of the areas that is of particular concern to me is participation and different forms of interaction. So my contribution here, I think, is to be maybe a bit the classical humanistic research paradigm, what you say, monster lurking in the background. No, but that could perhaps contribute with some of the critical thinking that is so important to the art theoretical development, and to reflection on for example, developments around participation. So here I just have a slide with some small keywords. I won't go through all of them, but I just wanted to make a couple of points. And one of them is precisely in relation to participation, the different levels of involvement from interaction, which is something we strive for, but we most likely want a deeper form of interaction, which is an involvement, and perhaps most likely over in a form of ownership, where there is this sort of equivalence between the user and the producer. But this we know is very hard to achieve. So I think like some of the reflection in relation to this area of research that has to do with the different power relations, that relations are power, but there are also all kinds of power being produced in relations, and most likely when we establish them, we have support of power. And in technology in particular, I think these relational aspects and power aspects are often both developed and under communicated because they are quite strong. So this is one of the areas that I think we can also we can have benefits from the cross-disciplinarity.
So as you mentioned, I'm kind of representing another part of this art and technology and design department that is supporting the FELT project. And I work with the product design, and what I'm talking about in this small presentation is some of the artistic research that I've done in that context also. In my artistic projects, I work with sculpture, and in recent years, I've taken eyesight and optical phenomena as a starting point for mechanical installations that engage the senses and perhaps serve as metaphorical depictions of the relationship between humans and technology. In this presentation, I will briefly track the development of some recent projects. One of the most dramatic and revealing optical experiences that the brain creates is the visual aura, or so-called fortification spectrum, that accompanies an attack of migraine. Spectrum is so characteristic as to be almost diagnostic of migraine. Its fortification term comes from the resemblance of the zigzags to the fortified star-shaped bastions and javelins of medieval town walls. Its jagged and shimmering, scintillating zigzags usually start central, or more often just outside the central area of fixation. The zigzags then move outwards, expanding and becoming brighter as they proceed, and then disappear in the periphery. The sufferer of migraine often first becomes aware that there is something amiss when finding one or more individual letters has disappeared, and the scintillating zigzags then develop soon after. These move, and when the point of gaze is moved, and typically accompanying the pattern is an inner, characteristically bean or kidney-shaped aberration of the field of vision. The march of the hallucination takes 10 to 20 minutes and is often but not always followed by headache and other typical components of migraine. The proposition is that structural elements of the brain or a specific composition of the visual cortex handling processes at the cellular level interact as a spreading wave across the primary visual processing center of the brain. The zigzag pattern of the migraine hallucination has been related to the microstructure of the cortical columns in the visual cortex. The flickering has been attributed to regional hyperactivity, with the alteration of the field of vision being attributed to neural inhibition, with the disappearance perhaps being because this wave behavior stops at a specific area of the visual cortex. Computational models of traveling waves of neural activation can generate corresponding visual features that strikingly resemble the hallucinations in migraine aura. The idea of tuning the medium or adjusting the intervening substance through which sensory impressions are conveyed is a continuous concern to me. Here, 2 rows of vertical metal sheets rotate on their own axis, and their individual structure is based on form constants, but also on the day-night cycle phases of twilight. Solar twilight is defined by the sun's elevation and is a direct function of the angle of sunlight in relation to the horizon. The different phases of twilight are numerically defined, and the phenomena of each phase is associated with different, slightly poetic names. Civil twilight is the first and brightest of the twilight phases, and historically signals the moment when an individual can no longer pursue one's occupation without the aid of artificial light. Nautical twilight is the second twilight phase, where the horizon is still visible, but some of the brighter stars can be seen, making it possible to navigate at sea. Astronomical twilight is the darkest of the twilight phases, and to the naked eye is almost inseparable from night. Foreground blends with background, silhouettes of distant mountains merge with the night sky, and it is the time when most stars and celestial objects make themselves visible. In this installation, the panels are referencing the particular light conditions of twilight, and their ever-changing arrangement does not take the spectator from light to dark or dark to light, but holds them in a perpetual state of partial light, as with a half-drawn curtain. Curiously, just after this work was done, I had my own experience with migraine hallucinations. Slightly exhausted, I was reading a newspaper one morning when I noticed I was having a hard time focusing and seeing the actual letters on the page. I slowly realized that my blurred vision was transforming into the flickering electrical pulse of a beginning migraine attack. I could clearly recognize the colorful, jagged patterns of the fortification spectrum, and the intense vibrating image sliding down the leftmost field of my vision. Electrical signals running through my neurons and the waves of electromagnetic fields were interacting with neural structures in my occipital lobe. And what I was seeing was a vivid but partial projection of my brain configuration. Within 15 minutes, it was gone. So what do we see when we are not looking? Or what do we see when we cannot look? Considering that the material substance regulating some devices of the world is now the same as the one regulating the way our brain works, perhaps in this gloom, we see the stars of electromagnetic twilight.
Hege Tapio, our PhD fellow, I'm not sure she is here now, but her research is on machines, humans, and emotions. She has just started her research process. If she's here, I will give her the floor shortly. These are about our activities, and the most important activity now is, of course, this, the 4th Renewable Futures Conference. This will also be the final stage of the Green Project as a Creative Europe funded activity. And I really look forward to see how far we can get. I think it's been a fantastic and very inspirational process to be part of. I stop my sharing. I have Hege Tapio now in her car. Hege, you want to say something?
Hi, yeah. I'll try because I don't have access to my notes as I'm driving, but I'm just going to have to wing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell shortly about my project, which is inspired from current emotion technology. And I'm interested to how the future development between, or of the interface between machine and human will be. especially with terms of emotion, of sensing, and empathy. I'm also interested to look at synthetic technology, of how we are kind of deducting biological life into machinic data sets, or kind of finding this meeting point. And also we can see with affective technology and our daily use of machines and things like mobile phones or embedded sensors. I imagine that it will become more and more integrated into our body. So it's this blending of technology and bodies that I'm interested in, and what kind of implications it will have for us. And when it comes to emotion technology, it's often been promoted as empathy technology. Like, it's a lot of focus on the good sides of the emotions in humans, but we also have a darker side. So how will that be also expressed, or how could it also be expressed in this light? Okay, I hope that was enough to give you a little bit of a brain teaser.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tege. Thanks for coming in from the car. I hope now you have some sense of the scope or the wide scope of what we are trying to work on at the Oslo Met in Norway with the FELT project. And if it's okay with you, Jens, maybe I will just give the floor to Maria directly. Is that okay? Okay, welcome, Maria. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Christine, for the presentation. Okay, I'm gonna present my work, The Plant Sense, that is on display at PostSensorium here in Riga. I'm gonna share my screen. Just a minute. Okay. This work, The Plant Sense, is a co-production with the artist Alberto Valverde, and is part of the research that we have been doing during more than 10 years with the aim to promote the communication and understanding between plants, humans, and machines. In 2009, we developed our first project together, trying to understand a bit more about the secret language of plants. And it was Chlorophylla 3.0. In Chlorophylla 3.0, we developed a sensor that allowed us to measure electrical changes into plants related to the surrounding of the plant, like changes in CO2, proximity of other plants, proximity of humans, movements, changes in the temperature, etc. So we basically translated the data received from the sensors into sounds. So the result of this work was a kind of sound installation in which you can hear the translations of this data received from the plant. And the most interesting thing that was that we can detect patterns in the sound according to different events that occur in the surrounding of the garden. Okay, so with the sensor, we can set each plant to be more sensitive for blowing, for instance, and not for touching. And we record this video demonstration about the sensor. You are seeing just a fragment of the video, and you can see the whole demonstration is in my website. So see now, Alberto is touching these cables and nothing is happening with the curve of the plant. And touching the leaf, nothing's happened. And now when he moves the pot, the plant reacts. So we can set the plant to be more sensitive, more for one thing or not for the other. Okay, some years after Chlorophylla 3.0, when I were focused in the creation of technological body-work interfaces as part of the research I did in my thesis, we created symbiotic interaction during our residency in Umeå University in Sweden. In this project, we use our sensor, Chlorophylla 3.0, to integrate into a wearable with the aim to create a symbiotic relationship plant-human. We received data from the plants through changes in sound, changes in colors, and also changes in graphics. And we offer to the plants CO2 and water. Once again, we were fascinated with these patterns we can detect by using the wearable. We can detect that something is happening in the plant, but we don't know, we really don't know if it's pleasure or pain. We just know that something is happening. So after that, after symbiotic interaction, we thought that the next step in our research could be to feel the plants in our body, in our skin. So it was the first idea to create the plant sense. Here, the plant sense. So we developed the project, the plant sense, in the context of a vertical residency. I don't know if you all know about this how these residencies work, but I'm going to explain quickly. Vertigo Start launched a call for ongoing research and development projects from the fields, from other fields for different fields of knowledge. And they published an abstract of each submitted project in their website. And after that, they launched another call to artists to apply to work with this project and developing a new artwork. And we discovered this project called Flora Robotica. They were researching about symbiotic relationships between robots and plants with the aim to create architectures. And we thought that it will be amazing to work with these people because we have a common interest. So we applied into this call and we won one of the residencies. The residency consists in spend 3 weeks with Flora Robotica team in order to know more about their research and elaborate our final project. So we arrived with the idea to create a wearable interface that allow us to feel the plants in our skin. But the more we know about Flora Robotica research, the more we think that something more apart the wearable was needed. So after our stay in Copenhagen with Flora Robotica team, we proposed the creation of a garden in which plants will be connected to our sensors and also connected to the wearable device. But we also propose a garden, an installation in which we created a kind of soft interfaces to be picked up by the public to feel the plants in her hands, because we think that something a part of the wearable is needed, because we wanted that the public can experience the plant in her hands. Okay, in other words, we wanted to create a kind of multi-species garden in which plant, machines, and humans cohabit together, trying to understand each other. Okay, because during our stay with Flora Robotica team, we realized that they were doing a deep and very interesting research about how to move plants with different temperatures of lights. They studied how plants can follow or avoid light and they were developing robots that can build architectures but with plants. But I think that all of this is really, really interesting, but in some way, in my opinion, they have an anthropocentric vision because, well, they were focused in control the plants into architecture. So we wanted to switch this vision, and we wanted to create a kind of garden in which the plants, the real plants, can control all the stuff in the garden. So we spent 3 weeks in Copenhagen with Flora Robotica, and also we visit part of the team in Lübeck in Germany. And back in Spain, we started to work in the development of our garden, thanks to a stay at Laboral Art Center in Spain in their Fab Lab. So now I'm going to show you part of the process. Okay, we wanted to create this kind of soft devices to pick up and feel the plants in the hands, but we had no idea how to build it. So we started to design 3D models about this kind of interface, and we started to work in the design during several months in Spain. We spent 6 months to develop all this part of the garden. This is the parts inside this soft interface. All of this is 3D printed and electronics. Okay, this is part of the sensor holders to put the sensors inside and to place into the garden, because the garden is going to be displayed about several months. We needed to develop something that allow us to water the plants, and we use 3D printed materials, electronics, and this glass holder. And we were inspired by the tentacles that Donna Haraway talked about in Staying with the Trowel. So we developed this kind of stars with tentacles inspired in nature. And this is the soft interface. We made a 3D printed mold, and then we put silicone. This purple thing is silicone, and this soft. And this is our first movement test. Okay, one of this stuff is in this stuff connect 4 plants. We can connect 4 plants. This is part of electronics that control the wearable device. Once again, these tentacles that are part of our mechanical plants that are placed in the garden with the real plants. And our wearable device to feel the plants in the body. Part of the process. If you can wear it, you can feel in your skin vibrations and low frequency sounds that depends on the state of the plants. Okay, this is the final artwork that you can see today here in Riga. And all the plants together in the garden works like a large brain. It means that this is possible thanks to the use of a self-organizing map, an algorithm that orders and groups the information reside in a map configured by colors in which each pixel corresponds to a color and a piece of data. We select a series of fixed points in the map and we assign them to the elements in the garden. This allows us to order the values residing from the plants and translate them into response through the elements in the garden. In such way, are the natural plants which activate each movement, vibration, or sound that take place into the cyborg garden. So now I would like to show you a short video just to show in movement these elements in the garden. Okay, and to finish, I would like to say that from my point of view, I think that we cannot see plants from an anthropocentric point of view. Perhaps one of the ways to take could be, which Donna Haraway coined Thulucene, the utopia of a new alliance between species that help us to reconfigure our relationships with the Earth and its inhabitants on the planet devastated by patriarchal capitalism. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you a lot, Maria, for the presentation and for all the presentations of the Feld group from Oslo. I think we have a little bit of time, not very much time, but a little bit time for questions. So are there questions from the floor to both, to all the speakers from the Feld group, but also to Adam Brown at this point? You may send either a question via the chat line or just open the microphone and just take the floor if you want so. Maybe I have one question to the Feld group and to Maria as well. There is a lot of talk about electric communication, the measurements of electronic signals. How do you integrate chemical signals? And I mean, the way that a lot of plants are known to be functioning is also less through just electronic communication, but also through chemical information embedded in so-called volatile organic compounds. Are you playing in this installation or are you picking them up? Since this is also a kind of communication system that plants use over distance, be it ground-based through the root mycorrhiza system of the wood wide web, or over Earth by sending out volatile compounds over longer distances as molecules that can be identified. In how far does this communication via volatile organic compounds play a role?
Okay, with our sensor, we can measure electrical oscillations that take place into plant, and we are not sure what is it, because well, we discovered by serendipity that we can, with these oscillations, depends of the surrounding of the plant, and if we change the surrounding, this oscillation change and the state of the plant change. Maybe it also the biochemical activity of the plants depends of that, but we are not sure at what kind of thing are measuring, but we know, but something is changing.
I mean, you mentioned also that it's questioning anthropocentrism, which is always a very great challenge to all of us, because it's very difficult to abstract from the way that the human body is being constructed and organized. And even if you talk about the brain, you make an analogy, of course, of a central organ that is something that is steering something, while of course the steering systems of plants maybe is not so central. So it's always tricky to get beyond this anthropocentrism. But in how far do you think that we can go through this kind of experimentation to what the actual context of the excavation is PostSensorium? I mean, and how far do you think that this empathy you want to create is enabling us to sense other senses, so to say?
Mm-hmm. Yes, as you said, it's really difficult to avoid anthropocentrism because all is anthropocentric. We are humans. But I think that developing this kind of experiments of artworks is really necessary to try to understand a bit more about nature and to try to achieve a new approach of the nature to try to go further anthropocentrism and discover new things and new point of views.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much.
I have a small comment, Jens, on this, because I think one thing is what we can discover as scientific facts, but I think it's extremely important to kind of train our fantasy and imagination to kind of change how on what value systems we act, and that's a kind of ethical reflection that also comes from this kind of project, at least for me, that you start to have new ideas about what the plant might be able to feel or sense in some way, and even that is a great is maybe the most important.
Mm-hmm. It is a topic that we also discussed, and I think maybe these artists are going to participate also in the Feld conference. We had this Nordic networks from the Goethe Institute about measuring weather, measuring climate through bioindicators such as fungi, for example, taking abilities of sensorium that other than human species have, and to imagine how they would function. And of course, also what the project members told in the working sessions was very much, it's about a kind of using fiction to, inquire about new facts, but also to question time scales, physical scales, and to, for example, what is the difference for us between climate and weather, and how does a fungi or a lichen, a plant, have maybe different scale values. So you're probably opening up more kind of the imagination of how a sensorium could be. This is how I see the project, right? Maybe this is a good point for letting Rasa to conclude, because she was proposing to actually make a transition, a very smooth transition between the questions that we first raised with the Green Project when we started it in 2019, and going to the PostSensorium. But the missing link somehow is maybe a kind of short resume of the Ecodata exhibition that was happening last year. So maybe we can bridge this gap between what we have done so far in the project and what are the last steps, while maybe screening a little bit of images that Rasa has prepared. Are you all right for it?
Okay, I'm ready to share my screen and show. So. Okay, so just like making a transition from green, which we organized 2 years ago. So last year we were curating the Ecodata exhibition, so which was more focusing also on the questions of which medium, which technologies are those which could maybe help us to become maybe more sensitive towards the environment, towards the others, because we are addressing these larger issues of the climate change. So, and how this could be maybe showed or solved or proposed by artists. And for example, in atmospheric forests, our own artwork, which also was part of last year's EcoData exhibition, because EcoData is largely built actually by the 3-year Swiss collaboration project in this Alpine forest. Because so what we were doing here, we were actually exploring how these emissions of the pine trees, how the fragrancy of the forest is affecting the climate, because these emissions are very, very quickly joining and creating the cloud into the atmosphere, and they are creating the cloud, affecting weather conditions locally and also globally. So what we did we wanted to show the complexity of this issue, because one of the main theses behind it, because all over Europe, so obviously after also this summer, we can experience that it becomes really quite big drought, and which would mean that there might be more emissions, so that our forests can become more fragrant. And so building up on this and also exhibiting other artists' work, like Markus Mieder, who works with acoustic ecology, also at the same forest. He tries to listen all these forests and sonify different patterns. Also uses Beeman work about acoustic oceans, so yet another more anthropological approach, how to engage with old stories and also the nature when you really become very close to it. And so this all together has led us to this year's topic of PostSensorium, because I think what has become really crucial here is that even if we think that we are these rational beings, accordingly to Emmanuel Corci, the contemporary Italian philosopher. However, it's still, first of all, to live means first and foremost to look, taste, feel, and smell the world around us. And in order to overcome these early cyber fiction fantasies that bodies are separated from the minds which control them, and also we would like to more kind of focus on the thesis by Caroline Jones, another author, the author of RIXC. So we would like really to keep in mind that, as she proposed, that embodied experience through senses, so which means sensing, makes us is what makes us to think in one or another way. So what we sense is probably what and how we think. So with this notion, I also would like, and yes, I would like also thematically, like, and conceptually to bridge to the next presentation, which will be in 10 minutes, our Christian Paul, because also even if we are aware of this, that our senses are quite important, and they play a role in, we still keep designing our machines, even contemporary intelligent machines, in this more old-fashioned way, so that kind of the bodies are separated from our sensorium. Okay, so I would like to finish here. And also we have insight into the last year's exhibition, what is important because it also took place in the exhibition hall of the National Library. So this is also for you to give some idea also where today the exhibition will take place. So just fading out last minute of this video. So yeah, last year we also Tamiko Attil's work of augmented reality, unexpected growth was presented. And so this is the library. And I just tried to stop here. Also with Agnes, our exhibition producer, who will be waiting us at 6 o'clock in the National Library. Okay. So thank you. And I stop sharing. And Jens, thank you for moderating. So we can now have 10-minute break. And thank you, Christine. Thank you, Mari. And thank you also, Adam. So I'm really happy to have you all presenting this really profound project, Green. Okay. So let's meet.
Rather, maybe just we can also point, I can send the link because there's also a very nice video that you have produced about the Ungreen exhibition at the National Gallery. So I will put this in the chat line if you want to share it, then people can, in addition to the video that you just showed, maybe you can also send the video link to the video that you just showed. I will put in the chat line, right, the one about the Green exhibition, the Ungreen exhibition 2019, because the video clip was quite amazing too.
Yes, and also one more thing, we are using all the time, the same link. That's only our video team will cut the sessions, but we can stay. You just can switch on and off when you like your video. But also, we will have these breaks during which we also can show these videos, just if someone is still there. Okay, so see you in 10 minutes. And thank you all very much for coming.
Okay, thank you.